okay to say I'm sorry?
If there's any doubt, any issue that could be said to be the fault of the other driver, I think you got to be careful about saying I'm sorry, because sometimes that'll make ICBC think that you're at fault. Like, why are they saying I'm sorry, right? They must have done something wrong. So I would be careful about that. I mean, you could express concern for the other driver in a different way. You could go and say, well, how are you doing? Are you okay? Do you need me to call anybody? I think that's just as civil and polite as saying I'm sorry. But I mean, in some circumstances, the other vehicle is stopped at a red light. They're not moving for 10 seconds. You, for whatever reason, come and hit them in the back. There's not much you could do about fault. So, if you want to say sorry, I guess there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it could be perceived by people saying that, you've done something wrong when you think maybe you haven't.
Welcome to another conversation where we navigate life's difficult challenges that are thrown your way, and we help you navigate them with confidence. And once again in studio on TBH, To Be Honest with Natasha, we have Vancouver's finest lawyer, Mel Chaudhry of Simpson Thomas Associates, who has more than 20 years of experience. Make that 25, Mel?
Just under 25.
Just under 25.
So I was called to the bar initially in Alberta in 2002.
Wow, time flies.
Yes, it does.
Well, today's conversation, Mel, since you deal with family law and personal injury, we're going to be talking about what happens in case of an accident, like a crash course we're giving you here on the show today. So, Mel, for the uninitiated, and that includes me, crash, boom, bam. I hope it doesn't happen to anyone, but in case someone meets with an accident, what's the first thing that you do? For me, I think I'll just hit the panic button.
Safety is the first thing, right? So you get into an accident. Initially, a lot of people are in shock.
Yes.
So be aware of where you are. So if you're on a highway or you're on a busy street, just take a minute. Take a minute, gather yourself, become aware of your surroundings. You don't want to step out of that vehicle when there's other traffic around, other danger around. That's the first step. Okay? And then if it's not safe where you are, then maybe motion to the other driver to just pull over to a spot where it is safe. Like, that's the biggest thing, right? You don't want to make a bad situation worse by putting yourself in more danger. So once you take a minute just to kind of gather yourself, make sure you're okay, make sure everyone in the vehicle's okay, then you've got to gather some information. Okay? That's an obligation on your part. So you're going to be dealing with an insurance company. You're going to be dealing with ICBC. So one of the obligations when you're dealing with an insurance company is to provide them with the relevant information.
And that was my next question, Mel. Once I kind of compose myself, once I get out of the car safely, how do I gather that evidence in terms of, is it just photos?
So what you need is you need to note the other vehicle involved. So get the plate number. Okay. Then you need to gather information about that driver. Because sometimes somebody will take a vehicle without someone's consent, or for whatever reason, the plate won't match a vehicle. So you need to at least know who the driver was. So what I would do is I would want to see their photo ID, their driver's license. I wouldn't be content with just having them write it down for you. Okay? Because that's happened where people have done that and it was the wrong information. So you don't want ICBC to be able to say, you know what, you didn't do your part in this. You didn't, one, obtain the information of the other vehicle, right? So get the plate, the make and the model, and then get, I would suggest, a photo of the other person's driver's license. If they don't allow you to take a photo, have a look at it and record the information yourself. So, it's probably a good idea to always have a pen in your vehicle and some form of paper, right? You don't need a notepad, but some form of paper. So you
Good luck finding that pen in my purse, Mel. But that's something to remember, to take a snapshot of someone's driving license. But another question is, do I move my car? Do I stay where I am when I'm clicking those pictures? Because if I need evidence, would that help to be in the same spot? What if I'm on a busy highway?
If it's not safe, you've got to look at safety first. And if you have to move your car first, then move your car first. But if it is safe, it's always a good idea to take photos in position where the vehicles were at the time of the impact. So that's a good point. Just in case, lots of times people remember things differently when they talk to ICBC, right?
Yes.
So you could be talking to the other person at the accident scene, and this is common. People say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, it was all my fault." Then, you call into ICBC and they say, well, the other driver hasn't called in yet. A couple days later, they call in and they've got a completely different version of the story. And they might have a witness that you didn't see at the accident scene. So what I would suggest is take those photos. Now, if there are any witnesses, people at the accident scene, get their information. Get their name, get their phone number. If you can get an address, great. Because people do change how they remember things conveniently later on when they talk to ICBC. So if the person is there at the accident scene, take that step. Even if it seems obvious, just take the witness's information.
What about people who are around the scene? Could it be strangers, or is it just the one who is in the accident with you?
It's better if it's actually somebody not involved in the accident.
Okay.
Because then what would happen is this is a person who has no link, no reason to favor one person versus the other. So they're an independent witness. So they're actually better. So it's just a matter of when you're out of your vehicle, you take a look, well, who's around? And you say, oh, did you see the accident? Would you mind providing your information just in case ICBC needs it? I think most people will understand that, right? And they will cooperate and provide that information. Now, another option, and this is a little bit more extreme, but if it seems like the other driver is saying something very inconsistent with what you know happened, and you know this is going to be an issue, have a look to see if there's any cameras in the area. So the cameras could be in a residence close by, and you could notice a lot of places have cameras now, and see if it's something that they may have, and you can knock on the door and say, I was just involved in a car accident. I just want to make sure ICBC has all the information. Do you have camera footage of it? Right? People, hopefully will share with you, and then you can take a video recording of what footage they have, so you have it right on the spot.
So Mel, one is taking the evidence from cameras all around, and I believe that getting Tesla cars to give their dash cam footage is one great life hack.
I think that's a great idea. And then basically if there's businesses around, like we talked about, gas stations, sometimes, the intersections will have cameras, but half the time the city will tell you it's not available. The other driver might have a dash cam, right? And having a dash cam is actually a good idea. A lot of times when it's he said versus she said, it's conclusive, right? Doesn't get better than video, but they can work against you as well.
It can?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it has happened with a client of yours?
Well, I had a client, this kind of goes to show about, when people are witnesses, sometimes it's not reliable. And it's not because they're trying to intentionally say something that's inaccurate. I had a client, really nice person, somebody that I trust. But the client was adamant that the accident happened in a certain way. The other driver said something very different. So it's my client, and generally speaking, I'm going to trust my clients. So I thought, to prove the case, I'll see where I can get video evidence. And there was a gas station across the street, and they had the evidence. So I had an investigator go out there and grab the video. I looked at it, and to my surprise, it supported exactly what the other driver was saying. And I was telling my client just couldn't believe it. So then I just showed my client, put the laptop in front of her, pressed play, and she was mortified, right? She was embarrassed. But it just goes to show you don't really know about witness accounts Sometimes they could say something and it's not accurate, but it's just an example, a little story that, I dealt with.
But a dash cam would make things easier where the insurance company or ICBC is concerned.
It would, because now you've got definitive proof.
We've tackled with photographs of the vehicle, photograph of the driving license of the other vehicle owner. Is there a need to photograph the environment that is around the car and inside the car?
So inside the car, if there's something about the other person's driving where you think they might have been distracted, and you have a look in and you see something, it might not be a bad idea. Like if you see there's a phone that seems to be active in its position where the driver would see it, not a bad idea to take a photo. But generally speaking, inside the car won't matter that much. In terms of the external environment, like around where the accident happened, well, positioning of the vehicles would be good to have, right? Where in the intersection, where they are in relation to each other. Sometimes in unique circumstances, other things are helpful. I have one case, I won't give you too much detail about it, but I can talk about this part. Basically, it was at an intersection on a side street, and these are very, narrower streets, right? And some intersections in these side streets, there's vehicles parked along the curbs of the street leading up to the intersection. And the other driver had, basically the issue was that there was a truck parked too close to the intersection, blocking the view of this person going through. So in that situation, having photos of that truck parked is helpful.
Right.
So it depends on the circumstances. So that's just one illustration where I can say, the environment around was important.
Okay. Once you are in an accident, is there a need to call the cops every single time?
I would say no, right? And basically, the reasoning there is we've got scarce resources. Sometimes the police will say, we're not coming. They'll get some information from you. They say, we're not coming. And a lot of times it won't even make a difference. So how an accident happens, the information is present around that time period. So a police officer showing up 5 minutes later, what are they going to add to the equation? Probably not a lot, right? Because they're going to rely on what you say, what the other driver says. Now, if there are witnesses and you have that information already, then what is the police going to add to the situation? There are sometimes you are going to want to call them. Like what happens if the other driver is getting out of hand? It's getting agitated and you're concerned about your safety. Another situation might be where the other driver just refuses to share any information. If that driver is fleeing the scene without you getting all the information, definitely call the police, because it's a responsibility on you to try to ID that other vehicle and the driver. So one of the ways you do that is somebody flees the scene, call the police, tell them what's happening, and hopefully they'll be able to find out where this person went and investigate.
Wow. Mel, is there anything that you should not be saying to the other driver, or is a civilized conversation good enough and allowed? Is it okay to say I'm sorry?
Now, if
the Canadian way.
Yeah, if there's any doubt, any issue that could be said to be the fault of the other driver, I think you got to be careful about saying I'm sorry, because sometimes that'll make ICBC think that you're at fault. Like, why are they saying I'm sorry, right? They must have done something wrong. So I would be careful about that. I mean, you could express concern for the other driver in a different way. You could go and say, well, how are you doing? Are you okay? Do you need me to call anybody? I think that's just as civil and polite as saying I'm sorry, right? But in some circumstances, the other vehicle is stopped at a red light. They're not moving for 10 seconds. You, for whatever reason, come and hit them in the back. There's not much you could do about fault. So, if you want to say sorry, I guess there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it could be perceived by people saying that, you've done something wrong when you think maybe you haven't.
Very interesting. When I call ICBC and in case I forgot to add something, would that go against me? And I'm talking about, say, an injury which has cropped up later, like a back pain or a neck pain.
So sometimes that happens,
Right.
right? Like if you're involved in an accident and it's soft tissue injury, what sometimes will happen is you start to experience symptoms later, and that's okay. But just be upfront and say, well, I started experiencing this symptom. What will typically happen is you're going to go see a doctor, right? You're injured. In how often can you get into a doctor within 5 minutes of calling? Probably not.
Not in Canada.
Right. So
And definitely not here.
so what will happen is by the time you see your doctor, you're likely going to be, at a stage in your time after the accident where you're going to know what's wrong, and you can talk about all these problems. So that way they'll have documentation. First time you saw a doctor, you complained of these issues.
Is there a time frame that I need to get this done? I mean, someone cannot walk into a doctor's clinic after a month of the accident, can they?
No, I think that would be very difficult because then the issue will be, well, if you were hurt, why did you wait for a month, right? I would try to get an appointment as soon as possible, probably within the week if you can. If not, if your doctor, like some doctors are not available for 2 weeks, that's fine. If someone asks you, well, why did you wait to see a doctor for that long? You can say, well, that's just unfortunately the way the system works here. And I think most people will get that.
What are the common mistakes people do when dealing with ICBC and reporting an accident?
I would say just before you report, think about what happened, right? So you can make some notes to yourself. Think about what happened in terms of how the accident happened. Really, in terms of fault, we're in a no-fault system, but your insurance goes up if you're held at fault. So even though you're not responsible for paying a person for their loss, your insurance goes up, right? So it does make a difference that way. So think about the details about how the accident happened. Think about your symptoms before you call and maybe note it down. Like sometimes the timing of symptoms is important. Like somebody will suggest that they suffered a concussion, or a doctor might think you suffered a concussion. The timing of symptoms shortly after the accident are important. So just think about it. So for example, if there are gaps in your memory, like periods where you think it was a little bit fuzzy, note those things, because it could be important for a later discussion on, well, do you have a concussion or do you have an injury that's related to this car accident? Dizziness, right? Things like that. You might as well report that if that's what you're feeling.
People also blame somebody else for the accident. It could be another family member. What are the pitfalls of that?
Oh, so basically you want to be honest, because if you're not honest, that's a condition to your insurance. That could basically wipe out any coverage. And then what happens is ICBC actually has special investigating units where they're not quite a police officer, but they have some of the powers of a police officer. And the last thing you want to do is you want to, let's say somebody's driving a vehicle when they shouldn't. So they say, I wasn't driving, my family member was driving. Okay? And you look very different. So witness might say, well, this person doesn't fit the description. Now, what you've done is you've put yourself in a position where you've lied, and maybe you would have been paid some insurance benefits for your vehicle, some damage repair estimates, damages. Maybe now what you've done is you've put your friend in a compromising position where they feel like they're going to lie for you. So avoid that. I mean, honesty is the best policy. I know it's kind of a saying, but it's true. And you kind of just see where things fall from actually what happened, right?
What are the common excuses that people have when it comes to explaining their accident? We've always heard this one excuse, my dog ate my homework. So do we have something like this here?
Well, that's a good question, because I've heard a lot of things over the years.
What are the wildest ones also?
Well, the biggest one, not necessarily wild, but the first thing that a lot of people do is they look for reasons to blame somebody else.
Right.
So, that happens. For example, things that you would think, how in the world is this person not taking responsibility? There's person stopped at a light and the other person rear ends them. I've heard things like, well, it looked like the light just turned green, other vehicles were moving, and it didn't move. Okay, so your evidence is that this person was stationary for 10 seconds and didn't move, and that's why they caused the accident? It just doesn't make sense, right?
And you're still at fault.
Yeah, exactly. Sun in your eyes.
Right.
I've had cases with like medical conditions, like diabetes, for example. So, blood sugar levels affecting their ability to operate a vehicle. And sometimes those defenses work.
Mm-hmm.
Like if a person has done everything, they followed the medical advice to a T to manage their diabetes, they haven't had similar issues for a long time, and for whatever reason they black out. That's usually there's a reason they black out. Like they're not following what they're supposed to follow, and then that's where their fault comes in. But it's sometimes difficult to prove. Other things, a dog will come into the front seat and distract them. Sometimes you've got younger people in a vehicle, and they see a friend on the street and they get excited and they want to do something to show off. Maybe something they shouldn't be doing, like driving close to them. They lose control. Can you imagine the significance of that?
Wow.
They could hopefully not hit a person, but you hear lots of stories of them hitting a tree or a pole. There's all sorts of things. Sun in the eyes is a common one. Sometimes mental distress.
Right.
I've had times where people have been honest about it. So what happened? How did this accident happen? Is there any mental crisis going on in your life? They say, yeah, this is what I was going through. And yeah, I was a little distracted. If you think about it, you'd lose a loved one in your life.
Yeah.
You're not quite there, all there, and you're driving. It could happen, right? So I've heard those types of excuses.
And ICBC will take cognizance of that.
Well, you're still covered by your insurance.
Okay.
Right? Like, it happens. People make mistakes. You're going through a rough time emotionally. You get into a vehicle. Maybe you shouldn't have. You probably shouldn't have. But it's an accident. It's not that you did it on purpose. So they'll still give you coverage.
Mel, you're in Canada, marijuana is legal. So what happens if someone is smoking marijuana and they meet with an accident? They are at fault, or aren't they at fault?
Well, it could be that somebody is intoxicated, but their intoxication didn't cause an accident. Like if you're just looking at fault.
Okay.
So, for example, it could be that somebody's intoxicated. They're, for alcohol, they're over 0.08, their blood level content, and the other person is just a horrible driver. They haven't drank anything, but they're a horrible driver. It could be that other person caused an accident, even though this person is intoxicated, right? So just because they're intoxicated doesn't necessarily mean they caused the accident, but chances are pretty high. Like usually you think, okay, if someone's intoxicated, someone is not intoxicated, usually you think it's the intoxicated person that caused the accident.
Just by being intoxicated, would they be liable?
No.
For driving?
Not for a civil claim.
Okay.
But now you're getting into other areas,
Okay.
like criminal and provincial legislation, right? Regulations. So that's a different story.
Okay.
And that's not my area. But of course, if you're driving over the legal limit, what I'm hearing these days, a lot of times police will not give necessarily a criminal ticket, but they'll give one under the provincial legislation, and they'll automatically take your vehicle and your license. And that's just easier for them to do. So that's what I'm hearing is happening more. But obviously, the more serious it is, the more intoxicated you are, the more likely they're going to charge you with a criminal offense.
Right now in Vancouver, we're getting a lot of stories about teenagers on e-bikes. What happens if there is a driver in a car and one of these kids who are on these e-scooters just zoom in and crash into your vehicle? They are not insured, right? Because that's not a legit vehicle under any act or whatever. And then your car gets damaged or they get injured. What happens then?
Well, you've got insurance if you've got a vehicle and you're driving on the road, right? So you will have insurance coverage. It could be your own insurance coverage, but you will have coverage to fix your vehicle.
And if we get into an accident with them, are we liable for their injury because they are, riding how do you say, a vehicle which is not allowed? It's illegal to ride an e-bike, I believe.
So now we're under no fault. So under no fault, if they get into an accident with your vehicle, then they're entitled to coverage. So what are they entitled to? It's completely different than what we were before the law changed, right? But they'd be entitled to things like therapy expenses, disability benefits if they're off at the time because of the injuries. Now, if they've done something which would suggest that they shouldn't have any coverage, like there's legislation which is very specific, that if you've done something in a way that it violates these terms, then they might not be entitled to anything.
So if they're doing wheelies or they're driving or riding dangerously close to other vehicles on a highway, would they be still eligible for anything in case they hit?
So
or they get hit?
Yeah, I haven't looked at this.
Okay.
But what I'm thinking though is if they've done something that is kind of egregious, like just a sort of thing that you think, a person would not qualify for insurance, even under their own insurance, then they probably wouldn't get anything because there are always exceptions, right?
And I'm sure the legislation and, of course, the court will be looking at fine-tuning those laws, especially since we're seeing a rise of kids getting injured on these e-bikes.
Right. Now, what's happening, though, is you don't have a lot of court decisions on these things, right? Like if it's going to be an ICBC matter, let's say they get into an accident with another driver, then it's an ICBC matter, whether they have coverage or not. A lot of times what will happen is with the changes in the law, lawyers don't get involved in that anymore. So what will happen is the individual will deal with ICBC, and if they don't reach an agreement, they'll try to deal with it on their own through an adjudicative body called the CRT.
Okay.
So this is like a online system where if somebody disagrees with what ICBC is saying, you can go online and you can submit your documents and your position, and this other body will decide the issue for you.
We now have come to the end of the show, Mel, but before I let you go, we're going to have a rapid fire round.
Okay.
We're going to have a rapid fire round, Mel. It's almost the end of the show, so are you ready?
I'm ready.
All you need to tell me is it's a myth or a fact.
Okay.
So here we go. If the damage is minor, I don't need to report the accident. Myth or fact?
I will say myth. You should report the accident.
Okay.
Yeah. And the reason is if the other side basically reports it, and they say to you, that in a different way than what you say, and you just don't report it at all, that could be a problem for you. But if there's no damage to either vehicle, then obviously it's up to the drivers.
Okay. The next one. If I feel okay, I don't need medical attention.
I'd say that's fact.
Okay. The next one. The other driver admitted fault, so my claim is guaranteed.
I'll say myth or false. There could be other reasons why your claim is not guaranteed.
Wow. Photos aren't necessary because ICBC will investigate. No.
False.
This is easy.
Yeah,
this is easy.
That's definitely a myth. Yeah.
I should keep copies of everything related to my accident.
I'd say fact.
Okay.
Yeah, at least for a period.
Right. So for someone listening right now, if there's one thing they should remember about handling an accident, what would that be, Mel?
After it happens, take a deep breath, collect yourself, and then deal with it. And that would be things like getting out of the vehicle, making sure it's safe, calling ICBC after you've thought about the process, made a few notes. Just take a breath, think about it, and then act.
That's a different advice I was not expecting. Thank you so much, Mel, for joining us and helping us demystify what should we be doing in a stressful, incident like an accident on the road. So thank you so very much for your time.
You're welcome.
A car accident can happen to anyone, and being prepared is one of those key things that we need to remember, and it makes the difference when it comes to protecting yourself and your loved ones. And remember, as Mel said, take a deep breath, take stock of the situation, and then plan what do you do next. Well, that's it on TBH with Natasha. Join us next time for another very candid and eye-opening and hopefully insightful conversation. Bye for now.